Buenos días. Tuvimos un día bastante ocupado ayer, ¿verdad? Mucho que aprender y también tenemos una agenda con mucha información hoy también. Y por eso queremos empezar a la hora a esta hora un poquito más temprano. Sin embargo, yo tengo aquí algunas cosas que debo decir, pero lo voy a dejar para el almuerzo, para estar seguros que todos se escuchan. Tenemos los certificados listos, sin embargo nos hemos dado cuenta que los números de cédula tal vez no están bien y que el nombre tal vez no está bien deletreado. Entonces quiero que vean los gafetes que tienen para ver si su nombre fue escrito correctamente, y si no está escrito correctamente, cuando tenemos el break a las 10 de la mañana, quiero que vengan y vayan a la mesa y le digan a la señora Roxana y señora Marisol, porque tenemos que corregirlo y tenemos que hacer un diploma nuevo. El diploma es certificado por el CNE, como ustedes saben, así que sí está aprobado por el registro. Esto lo voy a repetir luego también, pero sin embargo, varias personas me dijeron que tenían interés en el curso de dados, que es el curso de diagnóstico de autismo. Entonces, cuando tienen una oportunidad en el break, vengan conmigo, porque necesito saber información suya para yo poder darles información sobre el curso de autismo. ¿Ok? Y ese curso va a ser en julio. También vamos a pasar más tarde, después del break, vamos a pasar un papel. Entonces necesito que escriban su nombre completo de nuevo y su número de teléfono, y si pueden escribirlo, porque vimos los papeles que nos dieron y algunos cuesta leer su correo electrónico. Entonces necesito que me escriban su correo electrónico en imprenta, bien hecho. De esa manera lo podemos poner a todos ustedes en nuestra base de datos, y los teléfonos con el nombre se van a usar en una de estas que llaman WhatsApp, y si están de acuerdo, por supuesto. De esa manera nosotros mandamos información en cuanto sabemos que tenemos día, fecha y conferencista para nuestras capacitaciones futuras. De esa manera que ustedes pueden hacer sus ahorros económicos para que puedan participar y venir, ¿verdad? Nosotros queremos estar seguros que mucha gente aprende la información que ustedes recibieron ayer y lo que van a recibir hoy. Otra cosa es la hora del almuerzo. Cuando yo hago mis capacitaciones, siempre presento una persona con autismo, porque no podemos tener una capacitación de autismo si no tenemos la persona por la cual nosotros estamos trabajando o la persona que nosotros vivimos. Vamos a tener un video de 38 minutos y lo vamos a presentar. A la hora de almuerzo quiero que se vengan aquí. Vamos a tener solamente 35 minutos para el break del almuerzo. 35 minutos para el almuerzo. De esa manera podemos ver el vídeo durante el lunch, poner mucha energía porque es un video fenomenal de un amigo mío, y que es una inspiración para mí, fue mucha inspiración para mi hijo Mark. Entonces vamos a poner este vídeo para que lo vean y continuamos con el programa. Entonces, otra vez de nuevo, tenemos a Paige aquí con nosotros y yo estoy muy agradecida con ella. Y ayer que estuve con la presentación,
lo que ellos necesitan, porque de esa manera
students to communicate, it would be considered a preventing behavior, which is an antecedent strategy in the very beginning before a behavior occurs. So we know that there's a lot of assistive technology that's available today, and many of those things are available in your schools. There's a great display outside in this building of assistive technology that has been over probably the last 25 years been used. A lot of the things in the window are, I was told, were no longer working. They're there for display purposes, and a lot of those things have become obsolete as we've begun to use tablets and that kind of technology, iPads and such, for our students. And we know, and I know there are some speech therapists here, we know that students can struggle with communication in 3 different ways. Expressive communication, or conveying their thoughts to us. And receptive communication is following directions, understanding others' thoughts. And pragmatic communication, which is that social piece of communication. This morning, some folks from a school here in Costa Rica came and talked to me about the positive behavioral supports that they've been using for 6 years, I think you guys said. And it was something that they feel really confident with in using antecedent-based strategies. And the one thing that struck me when I listened to what they were saying was that so many times we have the resources in pockets, and people have them, and there's still widespread training issues, and so we can't get training out to everybody. That is exactly the same in the United States. We have lots of school divisions who do what's current and what's good, or pieces of it, because teachers have paid for their own training and gone and learned, and then they come back, and often they might be the only ones doing it in their building for a while until it spreads. So these communication strategies that we're going to talk about aren't new. They're really just visual supports. But they're things that we forget. And I don't know about you, but I was in the classroom for a long time, and the thing that always bothered me was I'd get a new student and I'd come up with a strategy and realize that I used to do it in my classroom, that very strategy, but I stopped for whatever reason and couldn't remember why I stopped. So I think it's a really good thing to go over these strategies again and again, just to remind yourself of what good practices are, because you get a whole new group of students and some of these things don't apply to them, and then you have to go back and remember what's in your tool bag. But anyway, back to communication. Social communication issues, or those pragmatic skills that our students have trouble with, like carrying on a conversation or talking about a different topic, are ones that our students with high functioning autism really struggle with. And so I've put some slides in today with some strategies that I've been successful with working with kids, and I hope they'll work for you too. But we know that picture exchange systems, whether you use PEX, the brand name, or a different version of picture exchange, we know that that's a really great way to begin working with students. So at the bottom of this slide, you can see in the picture it says I want, and then water, and also cake, I think it says, yeah. And so a student could take that card off and hand it to his teacher and request water or cake. And in the very beginning, and we were talking about students with visual impairments yesterday too, in the very beginning, picture exchange might actually be objects. You know, it might be a representation of a banana in order to get a banana, like a little toy banana, rather than pictures. And for students with visual impairments, it may have to start that way as well. All right, and this is an opportunity for communication that you use a picture for. When a student needs a break, they can use a break card. We've talked about it, but I like this example of a break card because it has the social piece on there. When I need a break, I will take out my break card, because when our students are starting to get panicked and they don't have the communication skills they normally have, and when you really need a break is one of those times. Maybe they didn't catch it early enough, so it has the cue on here, right on the desk. When I need a break, I will take out my break card. I'll give it to my teacher. You could put anything on there, but I like that it's right across the card. The cue is there. Here are a couple of other strategies. In circle time with very young children, we sing a lot of different songs, and usually the teacher chooses them, but this would be an opportunity for the students to communicate because there's a picture representation for each song that they sing. So the teacher could hand the card to the student and say, which song do you want to sing? And they could pick. And that concept could be applied to absolutely anything for any age. It's a choice board, basically, but this one is for a specific time of day. So if you thought about the different times of day that you have in your classroom when you could provide opportunities to communicate, a very simple choice board like this might be the answer. Some students may need far fewer choices. This might be too many and overwhelming. You may need to have one that has 3 or 4 choices on it, or maybe just 2 even for some students. And then there's a picture of a screen from a more digitized option. Okay, here's another example of the very same choice board. Something is wrong. This is the most frustrating situation for parents and teachers, when something is wrong and you cannot figure it out. So this choice board could be made for students to be able to communicate exactly what's wrong. Now, there's no way that we would be able to provide a choice board that had every single thing that was wrong, that possibly could go wrong on it. We need to figure out what are the most common things that maybe would impact that student. Tired. That's a big one for all of us. I'm a little cranky when I'm tired too. So, in the context of what's wrong, this could be, I don't know, and I would be more specific than that corner picture, I don't know what's next. We know that that often bothers our students. Put on here, not feeling well, sick, stomach hurts, you know, all of the typical physical things, but I'm hungry, I need a drink, I need to go to the bathroom. All those things can be what's wrong. Even for our students who can generally identify when they're hungry or thirsty or tell us, if something in the setting events is wrong today, they may not be able to. So having these tools accessible in your classroom is helpful. Okay, I was a preschool teacher for a good part of my career and had students with autism in my class. And the one thing that curbed behavior more than any other was, and it sounds silly, but was to give them something to do, right? Very logical. All kids, if they don't have something to do, they'll find something to do, right? So, and it was an embarrassing aha moment for me that maybe I needed to give them something to hold during circle time so that they would be anticipating their turn. And so here's an example of that, the book Brown Bear, What Do You See? It's a repetitive book. It's really great for building language. I think it's translated into I don't know how many languages. It's so popular. All the Eric Carle books are like that. But I just took the book and I copied it on a color copier and I cut out all of the animals and laminated them and handed one to each student. Some teachers put them on a stick, whatever, and it just made sure that they had one so that when I turned the page, I'd raise my eyebrows and wait. Who has it? And wait for them to say, I have it, or my turn, or absolutely anything. But that waiting with my eyebrows up in anticipation would cue them to look at their card and figure out if theirs matched, because matching is a stellar skill for our young children with autism. They come into school matching anything that is the same. They know how to do that most of the time. So this gave them the opportunity to functionally use that wonderful strength that they have to participate in circle time. So I thought about this very strategy and how easy it would be to put that into even a 7th grade history class. There are some things that you manipulate in almost every activity that you do, and if there's not, there should be. Nobody wants to listen to a lecture all the time, so I should probably have something for you, since that's what I'm doing. But I think that it's important to remember that these strategies that work for very young children work for children who are older, for students and adults who are older. Roxana's going to share with you some of her personal experience with Mark a little bit later on about using some of these strategies even today to get through their day and to make their day enjoyable. Because I think that's what we want. We want to get beyond getting through the day. We want the day to be enjoyable. So Passive participation happens a lot in special education classrooms where the teacher is teaching and a student takes a turn. And that's great, but when there's 8 students, there are 7 students that are waiting. And so anything you can do to improve the level of participation. So a lot of teachers that I work with have made a book that looks just like the circle time board that's on either on the screen or on the bulletin board, and they have to take little bitty pieces that match the ones that are on the board and manipulate them on their own individual board as you go. So now everyone is participating every single time, so no one is waiting. So that's another suggestion, kind of like the brown bear thing, for them to have something to hold and something to do. Only with that, everybody's doing it at the same time. So instead of making one big one, I would make one big one and 8 small ones, so that everybody would have one. Some kids could probably do that independently, some would need help. But I think it would make circle time a much more functional time of the day if everybody was busy all of the time. Classroom engagement is a marker for a classroom that is running smoothly. And one of the tallies that I do when I come in to assist a teacher is I'll just watch for 15 minutes, and every minute or every 30 seconds, I will count how many kids are busy doing something educational. I count working on the computer, that's educational, actively engaged in something during that time. And that becomes a measure then, that's a baseline. So how many kids are spinning, pacing, walking? To me, that's a measure of instructional design. So do we have something planned where everybody can be busy right now? And so that teacher can use that information and in 3 months or in a month, do it again and see if during that time period more kids are busy doing something active and important. Because I think when you go into a special education classroom and the teacher is working with one student, how great for that one student, and everyone else is perfecting their stimming skills or spinning or walking and there are going to be days where students can't be soothed by anything but pacing, and that's okay. Those things are going to happen. But just as a measure for yourself, how effective am I teaching? Do a little engagement tally. Who's busy? How many are busy? How many are not busy right now? And so these strategies not only increase opportunities for communication, but they get everyone engaged all at the same time. Okay, so we talked about antecedent strategies, which are those strategies that prevent behavior. We're going to have more of those later on specific to the scenarios that you gave me yesterday. But I want to move on to replacing behavior and teaching new skills and talk a little bit more about that today. All right. In order to learn a new behavior or to get rid of an old behavior, you have to be taught. Learning implies that someone taught you. Usually we learn things from the environment, but usually our students with autism do not. A lot of times they have to be explicitly taught. So we have to remember that we are teaching new behaviors. So in order to do that, the best way, in my opinion, I'm an ABA person. I love ABA. And I think good teaching of any kind is ABA, because you present a cue, you practice the skill, and you reinforce the skill. It's ABA all around. So as an ABA person, I really believe that a good reinforcer is the best teaching tool you have, because a good reinforcer will increase the behavior you're looking for. But if it doesn't have an impact, remember, it's not a reinforcer. So you have to decide every time you're teaching a new skill that you have to provide reinforcement at the appropriate time. So should it be immediate, or can it be a little bit delayed? And I say when you're teaching a new skill, it's important to provide immediate reinforcement, whether that's praise or something tangible. It has to be provided immediately so the student knows that they're on the right track. And then as you practice this skill, you can start to thin that reinforcement so that it is not always immediate, because we don't want them to become dependent on your reinforcement for that skill. We want to, just like any other prompt, we want to fade reinforcement. So I also recommend that when you are teaching a new behavior that you have reinforcement that is specific to that new skill. And if that new skill that you're teaching is really important, use that reinforcer only for that skill. Don't use it at any other time. And if you can talk to the parents and say, I really want to teach this new skill, I'd like to use Angry Birds or something to teach this skill. So can you restrict his use of Angry Birds at home just during this process? And a lot of parents would be like, no, I cannot do that. And you may, no, Angry Birds is how I get dinner cooked, you know, that kind of thing, and that's fair. So you might have to pick something else. But it is important to use, when you're teaching a new skill, to find a reinforcer that works, that's not being offered for free anywhere else. Okay, the Just Right Challenge is something that an occupational therapist designed, and it really is a very simple concept, but one that we overlook a lot in the classroom. So the Just Right Challenge is that happy medium between too hard and too easy. So when we're teaching a new skill, we have to make sure that we're in the just right zone, because if it's too easy, they get bored or frustrated. And if it's too hard, they disengage or get frustrated. And so you're evoking behavior, right? So what you have to do is come up with that right in the middle happy medium. And you know where it is for you. I think about exercise, like 30 minutes on the elliptical is okay. Running 4 miles, not okay. You know, I know where my happy medium is. I don't want to not sweat at all, but I don't want to have to go to the emergency room. So I try to stay in the happy medium, and exercise seems to be a place where we all know where our happy medium is. So what we want to do anytime we're teaching a new skill and we've found that happy medium, or if we're trying to teach a new behavior, we found the happy medium. Now what we do is slowly up it to get it to where we need it to be. But we need to stay in the just right zone. If we up it too quickly, we'll get frustration again. So it's something, it's very strategic, and we have to think about it. A lot of times I'll get it wrong. I'm in the just wrong zone, and I know it because I start to see frustration. So I have to immediately right then back down to make sure that I'm still in a happy medium zone. So when you stay in the just right zone, when you're talking about behavior or teaching a new academic skill, students become proud of their accomplishments. And that slowly ticking up thing, they can feel it. And they know that they're making progress, and no one's getting frustrated. You're not, they're not. So a lot of times when we end up with behavior that results in, you know, nothing being done, or even a restraint situation, a lot of times it was because we were not in the just right zone. We were teaching something that was too hard, or teaching something that was too easy, or our teaching time was too long, or the reinforcer wasn't powerful enough. There's something wrong in our teaching when behavior starts to emerge. And so I think a lot of times when we think about behavior, we think about the autism. But I'd like to challenge you to think about your instruction instead. This is the behavior. How can I change my instruction to get back in that just right zone, to keep the behavior down? Okay, so remember our behavior chain that we talked about so long yesterday, and I apologize for that, but it's so important. All behavior that we're trying to teach happen in that same sequence as behaviors that emerge that we're trying to extinguish. So when we're teaching, we want to do the same thing. We want to set the events for positive instruction. We want to make sure everybody is greeted when they come in. We want to make sure all their physiological needs are met. Are they thirsty? Are they hungry? Do they need to go to the bathroom? Is everybody, on point today with those kinds of things? And if all those things are right, then we can move on and present our instruction. Teaching is an intentional practice. It doesn't just happen, right? And I think I have a meme came across my Facebook the other day that had a really ugly little girl's face on it. The little girl was pretty. Her face was ugly. That sound bad? But she was grumping, and she said that that's the face I make when people say teaching is just babysitting. And I agree with that completely. So, okay. So what we have to do is show the student that the new behavior works just as well as the old one. So if I got attention for throwing a tantrum, but instead we want them to say, I need a break before it happens, we've got to give as much attention to that request as we do to the tantrum. It's got to be just as effective. The payout has to be at least the same, if not greater, for us to teach the new skill. And providing a lot of opportunities for the student to practice the new skill and then pouring on that same amount of attention is exhausting. It's a lot of work, and we have to be very intentional about it. But in order for that to be effective teaching, we have to make it the same for the student, or they'll be like, the tantrum is easier. I think I'll just do that. So we have to make it pay off for them. Okay. So when we're providing new instruction, of course, we model the new behavior and what it is that we want them to do. So we can model that physically ourselves, or we may have to model that through role play or pointing it out in another student when they do it. There's a lot of different ways that the new behavior can be modeled. And we need to prompt the student through the new behavior. So if we're using the tantrum as the behavior we're targeting, and we want them to ask for a break instead, we're going to have to pay attention and be aware of that tantrum when it's coming on. And sometimes they are quick. So it requires our utmost attention. So sometimes when you are teaching a new skill like this, other teaching has to be moved either to a teacher's aide or put on the back burner for just a bit. This might have to be what you're teaching today if the tantrums come on so quickly, if your attention is turned. So sometimes you have to make teaching a new behavior a priority for the day. You may have to plan some independent activities for some other students. You may have to plan still active learning, obviously, but it may have to be that your attention has to be focused here for several days until this behavior is under control. Especially if it's a behavior that's been in place for a long time. Some of you are working with adults that have had tantrum behavior in place their entire lives. So it's going to take a long time to get rid of it. It won't happen in 2 or 3 days. So you have to be patient, but remember that is the payoff as good for this new behavior as it is for the old one. Okay. So on our behavior chain, this is where the prompting happens at the antecedent level. So our prompting of the new behavior is an antecedent strategy. That's the new skill, not the old skill, the new skill. And then we have to be more reinforcing as a consequence for the old behavior than anything that happened before. Oh, and I wanted to tell you guys on the sheet that's circulating with your email, I'm going to email you the new PowerPoint. You have the old PowerPoint on your disk, but I'm going to get the new PowerPoint with the additions to you via email, okay? Okay. So we want to teach the new behavior. A lot of times as teachers, we want to teach it at a time when the old behavior is present, and that doesn't work. It's if you've ever had, and I think of children with high-functioning autism, when they are in the throes of something that is frustrating to them, that is not the time to reason with them. It's not going to work. There's no need. Just wait and try it again later. You can process with them later, but there is no need to try and teach right then. And I think when we try and teach right then, that's when we end up in a scenario that might end in restraint or even seclusion. So we have to be very careful not to teach too much when they are in crisis, because your instruction will be lost on them, and you may evoke behaviors that would not have otherwise come. So we want to teach the new behavior when the student's calm and ready to learn. And you guys know what that looks like for each student. It's different for everyone. And we need to teach the new skill when the problem behavior is actually occurring as well. So we can redirect and we can show them what we'd like them to do, but once they have gone too high and are I'm trying to think of a good word, you know when they're done for the behavior, you know when it's over, and I would wait until then to even consider doing too much. But if you can catch it before the tantrum starts, you do need to intervene. But if you can't, just wait. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So we have to get rid of the consequence of the old behavior. So if tantrum behaviors get a lot of attention, but now we're teaching them to use a break card, we have to ignore the tantrum behavior as much as we can now. Because if it's still getting the same amount of attention as the behavior we want, nothing is going to happen. We're just going to have tantrum behavior, and we're going to be teaching and teaching and teaching and teaching, and they're still going to be throwing tantrums. So what we're going to have to do is actually try to ignore the tantrum behavior. Now, I know that sounds ridiculous, because sometimes tantrum behavior is dangerous, and we don't want any self-injurious behavior. We can't ignore that, and we can't really ignore objects throwing and the danger for other students and things like that. So we have to address it, and we're going to talk about crisis behavior in a little bit later on today. But the important thing to know is you have to give the tantrum less attention than it got before. And a lot of times when a child is in the throes of a tantrum, we try to talk it away. We start talking and talking and talking. At one point, another behavior specialist and I in a school division we used to work at wanted to get a shirt that said, "Just stop talking," and wear it around, because when a child is in the throes of a tantrum, the least effective thing that you can do is talk to them. Please stop talking, because it's really, really hard. And some of you are smiling and nodding because you must be in situations where you want to tell someone else to please stop talking. So I think you have to remember that it's important to be as silent as you can in the throes of a tantrum. You have to monitor for safety and intervene when you must, but don't talk. I would say nothing. If you talk to someone else who is providing assistance quietly. And I would try not to give direct eye contact to the student who's throwing a tantrum either, because if attention was maintaining it at all, that might be enough. So you want to turn your gaze, still monitoring, but don't look them in the eye and don't talk. And that might be different than the way you've handled tantrums in the past, but I think that if we're going to teach a new skill, we have to take the attention off of the old one. So anytime the new behavior is present, even if they just look at their break card and you notice it, I would reinforce it. You want a break? Yes, break, and give them a break. Because we want to move toward the actual using of the card as best we can. And I put on here, sometimes it requires an extremely high rate of reinforcement in the beginning, and it does. Anytime you're teaching a new skill or a new behavior of any kind, you have to reinforce a lot in the beginning, almost to the point of neglecting your other duties sometimes. But these behaviors, like tantrum behaviors that are really dangerous or disruptive or destructive, those are the behaviors that need your teaching priority sometimes, even over academics, because they're interrupting everyone's instruction. And so we have to work hard to get rid of them so that instruction can continue in the classroom. Okay, so here's a couple of examples. John requires a lot of personal space, as a lot of our students do. He does not like it when his classmates get too close. So a classmate moves close to John, and then the teacher prompts the response. And after the prompt, John says, "You're too close, step back, please." And the classmate steps back. And the teacher compliments John for using that and points out that it works. Okay, that's in a perfect world right there. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this one for a second. So in a non-perfect world, the teacher would prompt the response, and John might push the other student anyway. Okay, that happens. So what you have to do is try and prevent that by your body positioning. So if you can get between the student, or even if you can physically prompt the student to step back as you're saying it, and then John might notice that he listened to you to step back, and that might help. I would do anything that I could to prevent John from engaging in the old behavior. And sometimes just your proximity to John will help with that. Okay? And at the end, a compliment might not be enough for some of our students. That might be completely lost on them, so we might have to provide something more tangible, access to something that they really like. Okay? So Catherine has difficulty staying on task and in her seat. Okay, the teacher has presented work that needs to be done at Catherine's seat. And teacher reminds Catherine of the expectations by pointing to the visual on her desk, and Catherine responds to that. And then the teacher reinforces Catherine with extra computer time. Wow, Catherine, you stayed in your seat. Would you like extra computer time? Very simple. Now, that's, again, in a perfect world. That might take a while to get there. But if the teacher presents the work and Catherine gets resistant and reminds her of the visual, you can say, "Catherine, would you like extra computer time before the presentation of the visual?" And say, "Good, then do this," and you can have it. So sometimes reminding them of the reinforcer before they actually do the behavior is helpful. I like to remind myself of reinforcers in my own life, the things that I'm going to do if I accomplish this task, or those kinds of things. We all do that kind of naturally with ourselves. Okay. And you have to remember to collect data on the new instruction you present. So, how many of you collect data in your classroom? Wait. Okay. About half of you, which is really good. And of the half of you that collect data, how many of you analyze it to drive your instruction? Okay, good. Good. And that's the ticket right there, because I work with a lot of teachers who take a lot of data, and they can show you the data, but they don't do anything with the data. And so I think that you have to remember that when you're teaching a new skill, you have to take that precise data so that you can see if it's improving or not. Because if it's not, you have to change your instruction. So, the data also informs us on how we can teach in the future. So let's say that our scenario worked absolutely perfectly well. We'll use John's personal space as an example. Our scenario worked really well, and John learned from that. Okay? So we know that John responds to a verbal prompt in a situation that he's used to. And the same with the little girl who had attention issues and staying in their seats. A visual works for her. So not only did it help that situation, but it informs future instruction. So when you move on to the next behavior, you have to remember a visual worked for that. So maybe we can use a visual here too. Or he responded to a verbal prompt, so can we provide him some extra verbal prompts and begin to fade them? And that's the main thing, is when with these prompts you always try to fade them when you can, with the exception of visuals. A lot of visuals are never faded in the natural environment, so I don't think we have to fade those as much, because when they don't need them anymore, they just won't use them. If no progress is being made, we have to change our instruction. We have to change or move on to a different intervention. We have to beef up the reinforcement. There are all kinds of things that we need to do, but we have to remember that we have the ownership of that behavior now that we're providing intervention. And one of two things is going to happen. It's either going to get better or it's going to get worse as a result of what we're doing. And the data is the only real way to tell us what exactly is happening, because sometimes we have setting events in our own life that cause us to think it was the worst day ever, when really the data will show us that it was a better day than the past 6 days. But because we're in a particular bad mood today, it seemed worse. So we really have to use our data to tell us what's happening, because our own things that we have going on in our life impact our interpretation of the day. So without hard data, it's really invalid. And it's embarrassing to say that, because after 25 years of teaching, you'd think I'd know how my students are behaving. But the truth of the matter is our own perceptions fool us, and that's just human nature. Okay. We sometimes inadvertently reinforce inappropriate behaviors without meaning to. In very young classrooms, the other students do that a lot. In the middle school, it happens again. The other students do that a lot. So there's a lot of reinforcement of a behavior that we cannot control. Such as if a student does something that's inappropriate but the other students perceive it as funny, a lot of times they will laugh. And so things are being reinforced in the environment that we're not meaning to reinforce. So we have to really try to work on the behavior, the responding of the other students if we can. But if we can't, we just have to be aware of that reinforcement in the environment. So whatever we provide has to be better than that. Okay. And the key is to change the reinforcement. So if the attention from the other students is really powerful, we have to try to find something more powerful than that. But I'll be honest, for kids with high-functioning autism at the middle school level, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, there is not much more powerful than peer attention, especially general, typically developing peers. So we have to really use that to our advantage at that time, and maybe get the other students in on the behavior plan as well to provide reinforcement at the appropriate time. And a lot of times students really want to be helpful. So teaching them how to reinforce appropriately is I would think, expected in a situation like that. Okay, we have to try to remove the old reinforcement and transfer it to the new. So when we're providing the reinforcement, that's easy to do. But when it's happening somewhere else, it's not. So we have to be very aware of it. And I will tell you that no attention should be given to the inappropriate behavior. And so other than those situations where it's dangerous, like we talked about before, we really have to withdraw our attention from it. So I think sometimes there are some behaviors that receive our attention that don't need to at all. Like, and we'll talk about them a little bit more. There were a couple of the scenarios yesterday that seemed to be a very big deal. But I have some more questions, because I'm wondering, maybe we can ignore that behavior and see what happens. So we'll talk about that a little bit later today. Okay, ignore that. It's not time for a break. Okay. So when we're talking about now responding to behavior, this is where we're going to talk about responding to crisis level behavior and things like that. So what I want to do is real quickly look at the behavior chain again. It's the same. Responding to behavior happens in the consequence section. So if we're talking during a tantrum and providing a lot of attention to it, we're likely reinforcing it, even if attention is not what started the behavior. So we have to respond positively to the desired behavior or replacement behavior, and we have to try to ignore the negative behavior. But unfortunately, behavior that we don't want can be divided into a lot of different levels, and there's some behavior that can't be ignored. So what I'm going to talk to you about now is a crisis plan that would become part of a behavioral support plan. There are some behaviors that you can pour positive on all day long and they're not going to change. So that's what we're going to talk about. Okay, so level 1 behavior is not severe enough to warrant attention. But there are a lot of teachers who consider level 1 behaviors to be ones that need attention. I'll give you a few examples. When my son Benjamin was in the 4th grade, Benjamin probably has ADHD. Probably. He's very wiggly, always has been, a little bit talkative, doesn't ever sit in the normal way. Like if he's sitting in these chairs, he's probably at least sitting on one foot, if not both, in order to just kind of keep him in the chair. He's 21 years old now and he's still like that. So, but he had a teacher who absolutely required sitting in that 90-90-90 position, 90-degree angles everywhere, so that you are sitting appropriately to learn. And it was just stifling for him, and he kept getting in trouble. And so she called me in for a conference, and I thought, oh my goodness, what's he doing? Because, he's Benjamin, and all my stories are about Benjamin. It could be anything. So when I got there, and she said, he won't sit in his seat. And I said, oh, is he walking around? And she said, no. And I said, is he leaving the room? And she said, no. And I said, does he sit in the front? Is he bothering the people around him? And she said, no, he's in the back. And I was like, is it bothering the other students? And she said, no. And I said, so it just bothers you? And she said, yeah. And then she said, I really think that medication would help him. I was like, you want me to medicate him because he sits on one foot? I'm not understanding. So we really had a lively discussion after that, and she never did agree with me and told me that he was not going to make anything of himself because he wouldn't sit in his chair. So he switched to another 4th grade teacher very shortly thereafter. My husband made a visit to the school the next day, and he switched. I just could not go back. I was too mad. So sometimes we make a big deal out of behaviors that are not a big deal. Okay? Because, and especially those behaviors that make our students with autism look like they have autism. We really want to get rid of those. And some of them we probably need to because it pushes other people away. But some of them, we don't have to. It's okay. And so I want you to just take a second and think about the behaviors in your classroom or in your home that really bother you. Really, really bother you. And ask yourself, are they destructive? Are they disruptive? Are they dangerous? And if the answer is no, it's probably a level 1 behavior, and it can be ignored, if not embraced. That is really hard for some teachers to swallow. You guys are all nodding, so I know you get it. But when you go back and you share with other teachers, it's really important to ask those questions. Is it really that important? Okay? Oops. So, level 1 strategy is clearly ignore the behavior. Completely ignore it. Okay. Level 2 behaviors are behaviors, it's not severe, but the student would benefit if it was stopped. So I think Mrs. Thompson, the 4th grade teacher, felt that Bennett would benefit if he would sit in his chair. I'm not convinced. So some behaviors are a little bit gray for some teachers and some students, but I think of these behaviors as behaviors like humming that disrupts the classroom, or maybe pacing at the back of the room that you were talking about because it competes, because then the other children can't pay attention to the teacher. If that were happening in an older class, that might be different because students could ignore it. But in a very young class, that's hard to ignore. So it might be a level 2 behavior. Another level 2 behavior might be screaming. Okay, running behavior might be level 2, depending on where they run and how fast they run and where they go, those kinds of things. Usually level 2 is to ignore the behavior to the maximum extent possible. And the reason for that is because we don't want to provide it undue attention, because we don't want to be the reason any behavior that bothers us is maintained or that interferes with the student learning. and we need to casually redirect the student. So I think that if Benjamin's behavior was a level 2 and it was disrupting other students in the classroom, she could just walk by and tap his desk, to remind him to sit down, had he been really bothering someone else. Redirection is usually the response here when you're at a level 2, okay? Level 3 behavior is severe enough to require an immediate response by an adult. So we can talk about all things that we've been talking about a lot today. I would not even put, I don't know which one of you it was, but yesterday we had a scenario about a student who bites his hands repeatedly and even has built up calluses over the years from doing that. I would not consider that necessarily a level 3 behavior, because if the calluses are in place, he's probably not going to hurt himself. And providing too much attention to it is probably what's already maintaining it, because if it's so calloused, he's not getting the same input he used to. So I'm thinking that that biting behavior is level 2 and should be ignored to the maximum extent that you can. A level 3 behavior would be throwing things, headbanging, running if they exit the building, things like that. Okay, so we want to intervene at the time of the behavior and keep the student and others safe to just reduce disruption. So we have a student, or I had a student who was served in a middle school who I was providing behavior support to, who has very, very strong reactions. And those of you who work at the school with the inclusion program, this is a student who might be at your school. She has very, very strong reactions, but she's on grade level academically, in the 7th grade, if not above. And she is, when she gets upset, it sort of comes out of nowhere. And it's usually connected to a setting event that no one knew anything about. And then she will begin to scream and yell, sometimes obscenities, at the person she's targeting, and tell them how incredibly wrong and horrible they are in words that I won't say here. And so obviously instruction stops. So she was in a regular middle school, and this was occurring at least once or twice a day, and clearly the setting was not working for her. But she didn't want to be in the pull-out classroom, and so when she went to the pull-out classroom, the behavior escalated even further. So the principal initiated her moving to a more restrictive program. So that was done. And in the more restrictive program, the behavior still occurs, but at a much lower rate. And she, maybe once a week now, which is much better. But all of her instruction has to be through the computer, because the teachers that are there are teaching kids with much lower academic needs than she has. And so it's my mission to get her back, but I'm not sure her need for her expectations to be met is so strong, but she's not able to always convey what those expectations are. So if we knew what her expectations are, level 1 behavior is what we'd be dealing with, not level 3 behavior. But she, it's a big struggle, and I know that is some of the kids that some of you work with in the inclusion program are probably like that. If not for this one thing, they would be in regular education with their peers. If not for this one behavior, they would be there, and that's when it gets really challenging. But in the new environment, when she starts to scream, the teacher, it's almost 1-to-1 ratio there. So the other adults just take the other kids out. They have another classroom that's empty, so they just continue instruction in there, and the teacher turns her back and completely ignores it. Now, not to the degree that she couldn't see her coming if she decided to become aggressive, but she doesn't attend to her. And so the little girl, whose name is Maya, will come right up to her and yell right here, and she will go and walk away every time, and the behavior is reduced now to just once a week. But I fear that Ignoring will work, and will extinguish it in this environment. But going back to the other environment, that behavior will never be able to be ignored. Even with intense training, I don't think that behavior will be able to be ignored. So I worry that it would be level 2 behavior at best in the other environment. So we're really working on providing training and a cushion for the new environment, trying to transition her in the fall back to, well, she'll be in high school, then she'll be in 9th grade next year, I think, yeah. But anyway, but when I met her, she was a 7th grader raising all kinds of problems at a local middle school. And it may, basically, if she thought the teacher should have copied it on yellow paper and it came on white, she would be upset because she expected yellow because it was yellow yesterday. And so but she doesn't, there's no way for us to know these ahead of time. So it really working with her to advocate for herself and talk about what she needs is what the teacher's doing with her now in order to prepare things on Maya's side. And we're doing some teacher training with the 9th grade team on the other side to make a difference in that. But in a situation like that, when Maya begins to be disruptive in the general ed classroom, the only option that we have is to clear the classroom, which at that point it becomes crisis level behavior. And so I want to talk to you about how I would recommend handling crisis level behavior. And I know a lot of these are in line with CPI. I think all of you use CPI here. I would just like to, if we could, take restraint off the table for the purposes of this discussion. I know that there are times when that is protocol in your building to use, but I want us to think about that as something we're not going to do. Crisis level behavior is aggression toward another person, and that would be ongoing aggression, not I hit you one time and backed away, but active aggression. Self-injurious behavior that is ongoing, so it's continuing. Destructing a room or area ongoing, so throwing a chair one time might get the room cleared, but I'm not sure that would put us at crisis level. But if they continued to destroy the room, that would be crisis level behavior. And a severe tantrum that doesn't stop quickly, even if they are not injuring anyone else, the disruption is so severe that the room has to be cleared. So those are those. And here's what I recommend: to follow the behavior plan explicitly if one exists. So we definitely want to spend time following the behavior plan. And if we don't have a behavior plan and we recognize it at this point, it's the time to write one. And a behavior plan consists of how do we prevent, how do we respond, and how do we prevent, how do we replace the behavior, and how do we respond. So remove any students who may be in harm's way. And remove any items that might pose a danger. Sometimes that's a hallway full of things. Ask for assistance by nearby adults, but I do want to caution you, not too many nearby adults, because if you have too many people in the room, you're not going to de-escalate anybody. They're just going to feel cornered and kind of trapped. And we don't want that. So my phone keeps locking and I'm losing my timer. Okay. And when we ask for assistance by nearby adults, I would highly recommend it to be adults who know the student, if at all possible. So if this is a student who goes into crisis behavior a lot, I would sort of have in the behavior plan a team of people who respond when this happens. So if the principal is the person who responds, for example, maybe the principal needs to be trained in all of the same techniques that you are and needs to be keenly aware of the behavior plan, or a security officer or whatever you have at your school who respond to crisis situations. You really need to make sure that they know the nuances of that student so that they are able to not escalate the behavior. And remind everyone that we're not going to talk during this time, not even to each other if we can help it. And then we need to move the student to a safe area of the room, and we don't have to put our hands on them to do that. A lot of times just our proximity and positioning can help the student to move. And we need to remain calm and de-escalate the situation, which is challenging for some of us. So sometimes we have to bow out and let someone else take the situation because we are either unable to handle it emotionally and we really are escalating ourselves. So that's not helpful. And we all recognize when that starts to happen, you know, your heart kind of starts beating faster, your face gets red, there's a lot of it, your palms might get sweaty. Some people start to get blotchy, you know, on their skin when they're getting stressed out. So recognize that in your peers, and when they start to, you need to ask them to go. And I know that's hard to do, but just say, you need to go. We'll talk about it later. Thank you so much for your help. Bye. You need to go. Because we don't want to do anything that's going to further escalate this student, and we certainly don't want any of our staff to become ill or injured because they didn't recognize their limitations. And they change from day to day, and setting events are what does it. So if we have some setting events that have predisposed us to stress today, and then there's a crisis, we need to not be involved if we can help it. You can monitor the other children, and someone else can come in. Okay? We have to remember that that's very important to take care of yourself first, because this might happen again tomorrow. So you have to be ready. The other thing that it's important to remember is that in crisis level behavior, there are students who can injure themselves. So part of your behavior plan needs to be, what do we do in the event of emergency? Who calls you know, extra assistance if that's necessary, whether that be an ambulance or something like that. In the middle of a crisis behavior, anything can happen like that. The other thing that's very important to do is that if you are 5'1" and the student you're working with is 6'2", you are not the person that should be responding to this behavior, and certainly not alone. You have to, you know, survey your team and figure out who is the best person to be there. And the one thing that someone mentioned yesterday was a mother who was fearful of their child because of their size and just the sheer power that comes with a larger teenage boy. Sometimes we just have to be realistic about the dangers of that and put all the supports in place that we can. But sometimes the situation is just too dangerous and something else might need to be done. And I don't mean to be, you know, but we don't want anyone to get injured. So sometimes that's getting extra help in the home. Sometimes that's providing other services during that time of the day. Sometimes that's the involvement of a psychiatrist. Sometimes that's the involvement of community services. So you're never quite, you know, and I don't know how that system works here, but there are other resources beyond the school sometimes that we have to get involved because we have to consider the safety of the home. It's very important for all concerned. So remaining calm and de-escalating the situation is probably the most important thing on the list, to keep your voice calm and even. And if you know that in certain situations that's something you can't handle, and I'll give you this example. I was observing a student one time who had some serious spitting behavior, and it was very targeted spitting and very deep throat spitting, if you know what I mean. He would generate all kinds of things to spit. And when that occurred during my observation, the teacher was providing instruction. It was in math, and they were working on square roots or something. I was very surprised at the content that was being provided, but the student knew what to do. But the page that was presented had 30 items or so on it, and about 3 in, the student started to escalate a little bit. But the teacher would just go, next one, next one, next one, and the student was just, right, and you could see it, and before you know it, the student spit, and the teacher moved, and it missed him. But the teacher then, that's it, blah, 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 timeout, and sent him to timeout. And all the student did after that was sit over by timeout and spit in his direction. So spit was just flying over the classroom. And when the student finally calmed down about an hour later, I said, "Can I try that paper?" And he's like, "Sure." And so I did the same thing the teacher did on purpose. Next one, next one, next one. And the student spit, and I didn't move, and it hit me in my face. And I kept going. Next one. Okay, next one. One more and we're done. Thank you. You may have a break. And I didn't acknowledge that he spit on me at all. And we did it a little later. He didn't spit. I come back a few more days. He didn't spit. What he was spitting for was the reaction from the teacher. I don't even think it was to escape it. I think he just enjoyed watching his teacher go. So, but he never, in all the years that I worked with him off and on after that, he never spit at me because I didn't provide it any attention. And I tell you what, it was gross, and I wanted to go home and take a shower because it just, moved very slowly down my face. And so it was not okay. But after that, of course, I washed up and did what I was supposed to. Isn't it gross? It's gross. But I think that I could see in the reaction of the teacher's response, the reaction of the student to the teacher's response, that he loved it. It was quite enjoyable for him, and so we really had to remove that. And so what I encouraged the teacher to do was make his celebrations that big. So instead of going, "Good job, next one, good job," big one, "Good job," and get really excited about it and give him a huge reaction for the things he was doing well, not for the things he was doing wrong. So, and we forget that. It's very easy to forget, and it's counterintuitive, especially when there's a behavior like spitting. So, okay. And then after the crisis level behavior occurs, there are some things that you really have to do. And of course, follow the behavior plan if one exists. That is follow the plan, whatever the plan is. And then communicate with all of the people involved and debrief together. Really talk about what happened. Go through the behavior chain. Was there anything about today that made that more likely? Setting events. What happened right before the behavior antecedent? And so on and so forth. Really talk about it. And then talk about what happened during the crisis, what worked, what didn't work, and then adjust the plan for next time. What are we going to do differently? There was a situation I told you about my friend Drew yesterday. We did the person-centered planning with Drew's family. Drew was on a field trip one time, and they went to a restaurant, and he got inside the restaurant, and he ordered his hamburger, and it came, and it had ketchup on it. Well, he doesn't like ketchup. He likes his cheeseburgers plain. So he started to throw a tantrum. And so they thought, oh my gosh, 'cause it's a very small, very crowded restaurant. And Drew is quite big and gets very frustrated. So the teacher thought quickly enough and had some pictures there and handed him the picture for cheeseburger and said, "Wait, cheeseburger, wait. This is not your cheeseburger." And kind of pulled it away and say, "Wait," and told the lady, "I need a new bun." No, and gave it back to them. And they came back, and he was calm enough to get there. But when he got on the bus, he sort of erupted again. He was very frustrated, I guess, by that. They never did figure out what happened on the bus. But being prepared for anything really helped avert that situation. But I often think about what would have happened had it escalated to a full-blown tantrum in a public place. And so we readjusted his crisis plan to include what to do if there's a crisis level behavior on a community-based instruction trip. Because you don't want to walk in and go, "Hey, everyone, there might be a big problem. Enjoy your meal." You don't want to do that. So we had to really think of how we would tell people that there was an issue, how we would ask people to step away from the food they're about to purchase, it got really tricky, and so we decided in that situation the best thing we could do was put in every possible strategy to prevent the behavior that we possibly could. So obviously ordering very carefully and telling the waitress, we really need to get this order right. He's very particular, and things like that to help him feel like we really understood what he wanted to order. The other thing, too, was to get Drew to order for himself with a card. So it was in writing. I want a cheeseburger, plain. No ketchup, no mayonnaise, no pickles, no lettuce, no everything, just plain. And he would hand that to the waitress to make it very, very clear. So Drew is now advocating for himself to prevent it. But during the debrief after that situation is when we really talked about what else do we need to do to prevent situations from happening like this, because in a restaurant where there are forks and plates and all kinds of things that could be quite dangerous in the event of a tantrum, we really had to be cautious and careful. When a lot of classrooms, I think, would be like, we're not taking him. It's too dangerous. But Drew's family really likes to go out to eat. They really like it. So we wanted to practice eating. His parents work in Northern Virginia. It is often a 2 to 2.5 hour commute home for them when traffic is bad. So there may not be time to prepare dinner at home. It's a lifestyle choice they've made that they really want to keep. So we had to practice. And so that debrief, that debrief became very, very important to the family. And we shared with them what we came up with, and they started instituting the same card when they went out to dinner as well. It's also very, very important to document the incident as directed by the policies of your facility. And during that debrief time is a really good time to put that together, because you have more than just your eyes. Because sometimes the perspective, because I'm standing here and what I see might be very different than what you guys in the back would see if there was an incident here in the middle. So we really have to use all of the eyes that were present to talk about the behavior when we're documenting it to make sure we get it right. You also want someone else who is present to read what's being turned in to make sure that you didn't miss anything or misinterpret what happened. And I want to say one more thing about that. A lot of time egos get in the way when we're talking about that kind of thing, and people don't want to be wrong. I don't ever want to be wrong, but we're all wrong a lot. And so we have to kind of put our egos aside when we're debriefing and we're wondering about what to do with a student. And just because the really great idea you had didn't work doesn't mean it wasn't a really great idea. And a lot of times we as teachers, because we don't get a lot of reinforcement, except from our students, we sort of put ourselves down a bit when we get something wrong and think, maybe I should do something else. Maybe this isn't for me. Okay, I'm going to go back to data collection because it is so very important. Let me see where we are on time. Yeah, we're good. Okay. When we talk about data collection, I just wanted to make sure that you guys know that I'm talking about collecting data on behavior, and not necessarily, we all keep academic data because grades and however you give academic marks for your students, that's ongoing and expected as a teacher. But a lot of times with data collection for behavior, we miss it a lot and we only get some of the data out of the nature of the day and what it's like. So that's why it's really important to choose those target behaviors that are most important to you. Because realistically, you cannot take data on everything every day. There would be no time to teach. And teaching is your job. So you have to take data on the things that you have intentionally selected for targeting. Okay? You also have to begin to take data on behaviors that are interfering with the student's learning or that of others. So that makes your choices really easy sometimes in the classroom. Those things that can be ignored, no data necessary right now because we've got some other things that are in front of it. So you have to prioritize what behaviors you're going to take data on. If you try to take too much data, it will be invalid. So you really want to make sure that what you're taking is useful for instruction. Also begin to take data on behaviors that can inform your instruction and how to change. Like, there are some behaviors like flapping or spinning or I have a student that I work with now who will, for no known reason, pop up out of his seat and sit back down. It's just a little movement he makes. I'm not sure why. And he's sitting in one of the desks that has a desk attached to the seat. So I don't know how he does that without hurting himself, but he pops right up and sits right back down several times a day. I would say probably 50 times a day during his instruction. He will do that. And so it's very important for the teacher to be located in a way that when he does that, her chin is not near his head, because, you know, that could really hurt. But other than that, there really aren't a lot of, it doesn't really bother anyone. It would be good if it was gone maybe, but it doesn't bother anybody, so we're not keeping data on that behavior right now. It's not, really wouldn't inform us of anything except how often he does it, because the trigger is inside him. I believe it's a sensory thing. He just needs to move. So there isn't anything we could take data on as an antecedent. There's nothing to see. You can't see it. The only thing you can see is the pop-up. You don't know why it happened. And so there's nothing in the environment consistent that they can find. So we don't keep data on that behavior. Might every once in a while just to see if it's gone down, but that would be a waste of your time. Okay. Okay, so, and this are the last couple of slides before the break, so we're going to break a little bit early. But proactive planning and putting it all together. So what I want you to remember is that you aren't going to know everything. No one does. And so you have to communicate with others and ask questions. This group here is an excellent resource for you. If you haven't met someone new from another school, I highly recommend that, because someone you might be able to email each other or Facebook message each other to say, hey, I have this going on. Any suggestions? Some of the best ideas I've ever found came from other teachers. So to have someone that you can bounce some ideas on that's outside of your school is sometimes quite helpful. Of course, with confidentiality, at least in the United States, we don't use names when we exchange information like that because of confidentiality laws, but we can certainly talk about behaviors and what to do. And you have to understand that you will absolutely need support. You cannot be on a special education island and expect to survive in the field. The average length of a special education teacher in the United States is 3 years. So, and a lot of people move on to something else. But the ones who were meant to do it make a career out of it. But you really, and I think those teachers are the ones who take care of themselves and really use their data to inform their instruction. So, and you don't want to just be a special education teacher, you want to be a good one. And so in order to do that, you need to recognize that you need support from other people. And I know that some of the support is limited, at least it is in Virginia where I live. There are 8 people on my staff, and we support 8 school divisions. Some of them have 65 schools in them, so it's absolutely impossible to get to every single need. One school division that my colleague supports has 99 autism programs in that one school division, so there's no way that she could support every need, but she's made a network of the teachers within that program so that they can support each other, and that's what I highly recommend. And then it's important to share with others what you learn. So if you had a behavior that you were struggling with and you have conquered it, you need to share it with other people. Whether you blog about it or just email it to a couple of friends, it's important to share what you know and getting in that habit of sharing what you know, because odds are they've never countered that exact same behavior in that exact same way again. A lot of the behaviors I've used to talk about have been generic behaviors that are common among kids with autism, but some of the behaviors we face are unique, to say the very least, and so anything we can do to build our toolbox is important. I don't want you to be, I remember teaching in a school where I was the only special education teacher, and and I happened to have an autism program, but it was back in the early 1990s when we didn't talk, the incidence of autism when I started teaching in the United States was 1 in 350, and now it's 1 in 68. So we talk about it a lot more than we used to. But back then, no one had any advice for me because it was new. So I had to sort of seek it on my own. And there also wasn't really an internet when I started teaching either. There was, but it was this obscure, only connected to America Online thing. And it wasn't what it is today. So try to remember the importance of communicating with other people as we get through here. Okay. So I've already said, remember that you can't do it alone, but it's important to say that. And you need to meet regularly with your team members. And I know that time is the most important thing that you don't have enough of as a teacher. But if you make time to meet with your team to discuss behaviors, a lot of solutions will emerge. And a lot of that, as you know, sometimes has to be on your own time. But even if you do that over coffee or over a drink on Friday night, whatever it is that you do to get together with your team to really help, that's important. So you need to update the team and the stakeholders regularly on target behaviors. So if you get together and you write a behavior plan, it's important to get back together at after a set amount of time, for you to be able to see if things need to be changed because things are working, or things need to be changed because they're not working. And brainstorm with the team to determine what changes should be made, and then try them and set a date to meet back again and say, I tried that and it didn't work, or I tried that and it worked. But it's important, writing the behavior plan isn't the end of it. It is only the beginning of it. Okay? Okay, look, time for lunch. It's not. That's time for break. I added a lot of slides to the afternoon, so all of these are messed up. All right, so let's take a break, and we're supposed to come back together at 10:15, so let's try to come back together at 10:10, because I think Roxana has some things for you, so that'll give you about 5, 6, something extra minutes, 7. Okay? Is that good? Okay.